All right, so let's give everyone a couple seconds to finish logging on. Everyone a second or two to get settled in. Right. All right. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Skilled Nursing News Staffing Summit. I'm Amy Stulik with SNN, and I'll be moderating this session, Unlocking the Aspirations and Trends of Today's Long-Term Care Workforce. Before we begin, I want to say thank you to our thought leadership sponsors, KARE, WorkSync, AccuShield, Polaris Group, IntelliCare, and our awareness sponsor, ShiftKey, for sponsoring this webinar series. Now, to give everyone an understanding of how this webinar will run, we're going to have a panel discussion and then leave some time afterwards for audience Q&A. And we welcome your questions throughout the webinar. So if you have any questions or comments, please enter them into the Q&A on Zoom, and we will get to as many as we can. And if you miss any of the sessions during the webinar series, all of the sessions being recorded will be posted to the event site at the conclusion of the series and will be available for 30 days. So now on to our panelists. Today, I am joined by Tom Annarella, the Administrator for Valley High Nursing and Rehab and a board member of the Illinois Healthcare Association. We also have Ezidube Eze, Senior Living Consultant at Elder Branch Consulting, as well as Steph Colbo, the Chief Growth Officer at KARE. Now, I'd love to go around and hear a little bit more about each of your backgrounds. So we can start with Tom, then Eze, and then Steph.
Well, thank you, Amy. My name is Tom Annarella. I've been a licensed nursing home administrator for a little over 25 years, board member with the Illinois Healthcare Association, and I also do some consulting on the side. So I'm going to be coming at today's conversation from the skilled nursing background.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Amy, for the quick introduction. My name is Ezidube Eze, and I've been in the industry for the last decade. The first 2 years of that, I served as a home health aide, and for the last 8 years, I've served as an administrator. I've worked at in a facility position. I've worked at a regional level, overseeing territories in multiple different states. So I view this from the lens of our direct care staff members. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. And thank you both for joining. I'm Steph with KARE. I'm the Chief Growth Officer. I've led growth here for 3 years. And prior to that, I led the post-acute division at NRC Health, which was focused on really capturing the voice of the customer and the employee within senior care. So in senior care for a little over 15 years, my passion is really trying to get new team members and keeping our team members in our space. So excited for this conversation today with the two experts in this category specifically. I can't wait to talk to them about all the things staffing related. So let's kick it off.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Steph. Let's kick off our discussion, and I'll be back for Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys. So I want to start. I think you all have a link in your chat with the white paper that we're kicking off the discussion around. Do you know your caregivers white paper? And I have a few questions on that. I want to get your thoughts. What are the most interesting findings you found from this study? And did anything surprise you? I don't know if Eze or Tom wants to go first.
Eze, I'll let you go first on this one. I'll take first on the next one. How about that?
Okay, sure. I think there's always an interesting gap based on how leaders perceive they're being received versus direct care staff members. So I love this report. Please download it. Please make sure you reference it. But I think the startling thing was just seeing the gap from what the CNAs felt like were important versus what the operators felt like were important, specifically the 401k. They're looking for programs that are matched. They're looking specifically for that. And then they're also tuning into their premium cost. When they surveyed the operators didn't know how much their insurance premium was to the level of the CNAs. So that gap was one of the biggest things that stood out to me.
And I'll piggyback on that. I completely agree with the gap being one of the biggest things that stood out. But the second thing for me was the average age of a CNA being 41. I thought that seemed a little high. Everybody that we're hiring right now seems to be fresh out of high school or really in that 20-year-old gap or age range. So it's interesting to see. I mean, that kind of tells me that we've got some much older CNAs still out there grinding with the rest of us. So being aware of the different generations, and that probably will lead us into some other questions in a few minutes anyway. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. No, that's great. Was there anything from the findings that you feel that we should implement to attract and retain more staff?
I think there needs to be a little bit more education at the time that we're meeting with a new hire or a new candidate and trying to discuss the gaps that were identified. So if the idea is that we're missing the mark in the conversation, this report helps highlight where that conversation needs to go at the time of recruitment.
I think it's also important that the leaders of the facility, when they're having conversations with prospective employees, they're looking at the total compensation and that they do know the microscopic information about the premiums. And that's part of the conversation when they offer the total compensation.
Yeah, I agree. So let's kind of get into generational differences. Tom, you mentioned that our average age that filled that out was 41, whereas who you're hiring is fresh out of college. So getting into Gen Z and millennials, how do you really approach generational differences in the workplace, and how are you responding to those, Tom, as you mentioned, the new generation that's entering our workforce?
Well, I think that understanding the generational differences is one of the keys that every leader in a building needs to have in order to be able to bridge some of the gaps that are occurring within your labor force. If you're saying that the average CNA is 41, then let's just assume you've got 4 different generations of CNAs working in your building. And I would argue in some cases you might even have 5. Communication style between all of them is completely different. What they want, what they need from a leader, how they perceive, even as something as simple as presence and touch points is completely different from one group to the next. So raising the awareness of how those different generations see the workplace is huge, because a lot of conflict in the workplace is not because of ideas, it's because of generational differences in how we approach things.
And I think to add to that, how they manage conflict is very different too. And as leaders, you're going to have to you're going to have to be well versed on how they interpret information, how they receive information, what they want out of the job, what is a core motivation when they wake up, and that is different from every single generation. So you're going to have to take a very prescriptive approach to this, and you can't just do one thing. For example, texting your staff may work for a part of your staff, but calling your staff may work for another portion of it. So you're going to have many tools in your tool belt, and you're going to have to constantly be looking to sharpen it. It can never be dull.
Yeah. So let's dive a little layer deeper on that. When you talked about the different communication styles, I'd love to know, if you have any specific examples or what you're doing with communication styles and preferences for Gen X, boomers, your millennials, how are you connecting with them? How is it working, not working?
So this is an interesting one, right? So I have a gentleman that is in my maintenance department, and in next year, he'll celebrate 50 years with my company. He's never worked for another company. I send an email, and it's pretty wild, but I send an email and I get a knock at the door, and that's his way of responding. So texting him is not going to work. It's exactly what Eze was saying. You have to communicate in every single style and medium. Let's just use the baby boomer generation. They much prefer having you pick up the phone and talking. Whereas you get down to Gen Z, they don't want to talk to you on the phone. In fact, most of them don't even know how to hold the phone to their ear because they look at it to see it on a video call, right? So you have to, like Eze was saying, you have to communicate your message in every single format, verbally, written, email, text. I mean, you got to get that message out so you cross all of those different generations. And we can, get farther into the weeds with that, but I think we'll lose some of the back end conversation. So I'll leave it at that. But Eze, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, once you start to assume that you know how a generation likes to be talked to, you start losing automatically. I had a maintenance director as well. I wanted to recognize him. I like recognition, like to recognize them in front of team members, but he pulled me to the side and said, "Hey, that's not my style." Or I had a maintenance director where I would text him updates on what's going on in the building, and it would be maybe 11 o'clock at night. He'll call me at 2 a.m. to tell me how he fixed it versus my expectation to maybe get a text message. So I think it's maybe setting those boundaries, is just having those informal conversations.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. So talking about recruitment strategies, are you or do you need to tailor it based on each generation? What are we doing there?
Ezzy, I'll let you take the lead on this one.
Oh, 1000%, 1000%. Most prospective employees, not only are they applying to your location, they're typically applying to 15 or 14 other ones. And when you call them, they may not even remember who they applied to. You may have to remind them what facility they're applying to. But it is about who can get to them as quickly as possible. When we are looking to bring residents into the facility, we have an industry standard of getting back to the hospitals within 15 minutes. There's pretty much a new standard of getting back to anybody that shows interest in working your facility very quickly, if not the same day, within 24 to 48 hours, because the other organization may have done that already and started those touch points. And those touch points is what bring connectivity. Yep. And they want connectivity. So the more warm those touch points, one company that may text versus a call, they may go to the company that calls because it's warmer. Go ahead, Tom.
No, you nailed it. And I think it's understanding who you're recruiting in that moment. So if I'm looking to recruit someone that's on the younger side, I'm not going to post an ad in the paper or post it online. I'm going to post it in social media because that's where they're at. You got to go to the place that the candidate you're searching for, that's where they hang out. So anything from millennial down, they're hanging out on social media. And how you approach it, right? The idea of posting an ad in the newspaper is dead. Nobody wants to read a blurb. They're going to scroll to the next one. I think what gets people now is these very short video clips that show what life in your building is like. So it's a recruitment video. It's a resident video for referrals. Those videos that are very short that you can put on your social media pages are driving the interest coming back. And then you can talk to them about the what's what. But I think this whole idea of old school traditional advertising for recruitment, that has long since passed. I would say when COVID happened, that went the way of the dodo. So Ezzy's right. You got to go after them where they're at.
And I want to add one more thing. I love the fact that you mentioned meet them where they are. It's very important to meet them where they are. A lot of the current workforce, the newer workforce, they like to see those videos. They like to see those stories. They like to see what the unit looks like. So the more that you can take something from text and give them a visual of what it looks like, and once again, you build that connectivity, the more they're going to respond to you.
Yeah, I hear a lot about online social media, and one thing from my former life prior to KARE, that we knew consumers, which were everybody that you're talking about, what they were doing is they're looking for reviews and ratings online. So I know even one thing at KARE that we've done is we publish hero ratings of communities and tell their story. And it's wild because people, when they go through the recruitment process, actually make note of that, saying that they feel more comfortable because they feel and see the real life example from people that have experienced KARE. So very cool. So let's get into recruitment.
Can I add one thing, Steph?
Yeah, absolutely.
Real quick. Just remember that the younger generations, your Zs and your millennials, they really are driven by purpose. And so they want to know that if they're coming to your organization, they're going to be able to make a difference. So make sure you tell your story about why their work that they're going to do for you is going to be meaningful. It's just one of those things that they really want to have a connection to that. And so you got to sell your story.
Yeah. And Tom, mention like the social platforms that you're using, because I know you're using a few of the social platforms that you found to work.
The kind of the tried and true, right? So we do Facebook, Instagram, and not so much on Snapchat. I have a lot younger staff that run this for me. At 47, I'm not going to pretend that I understand it.
Yeah.
I know it works, and that's all I need to know. I would look at where do you post and do that kind of stuff? You seem to be on the younger side.
I would say the same areas, but I also take in information from TikTok. So I would love to start to use that as a platform to strategically advertise. But I would say that tried and true methods are working with more intentionality with word of mouth referrals.
Well said.
Absolutely. I do too. Okay. So when we talk about recruiting, what have you found to work in 2023? I know it's ever evolving post-COVID. Obviously, we're talking about all the digital strategies, but what is actually working for you all?
My biggest place that we bring in our referrals is the high schools. So we're in every high school in my area. And what does that mean? We partner with them. We offer, so some of the high schools have a CNA class or program that we offer. Our site as a clinical site, but we go in once a semester to their health classes and we talk about long-term care and why having a job in long-term care, again, getting back to that, has meaning and what difference you can make, and then why our organization is the one for them to choose. So that's why I made the comment earlier about we're seeing more younger people coming in, young professionals versus the older CNAs. And we start them as just a universal worker. Then we train them to be an RA. Then we get them into CNA school. And then once you get that, now hopefully you got them hooked and you can keep pushing them up, nurses, and getting them into leadership. But I more so than any social media, being in those high school classes, because every time we come out, it's a whole handful of applications that we get within a week.
I think having a clinical site is imperative. It just shows that you're in a learning organization, a learning facility. I think it's important for future prospective employees to see. But I think making sure that you're intentional about discussing career ladders is very important early on. And maybe not the typical career ladders, maybe talking about what it looks like to go to CNA to RN or CNA to an administrator. But I think those first 90 days when you're meeting someone new, you kind of need to at least shock them, or they need to really understand that you care about them past just being a number. And a lot of that comes when you know where they want to go and you help be a bridge to that, even if that means they leave you in a year.
You nailed it on that part about engaging them about what their future looks like. I don't think leaders spend enough time doing the talking, then they spend too much time doing the writing. A real leader's job in that building is to know the pulse of every single one of their people and what their goals are. And you can't expect, like I hire 18-year-old Johnny and I talk to him about what his goals are. I can't expect when he's 23 and now married and has a child to have that same goal structure. So if you're not actively talking with your people, then how are you going to make sure that, like as I said, you're engaged with them? You show them that you care about them as a person, not just as a number or an employee. And so it's absolutely critical that you're doing stay interviews or check-ins or whatever you want to call it throughout the year. And there are 10, 15 minutes about, hey, 3 questions. How are you? How am I? And how are we? Real simple.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, I love stay interviews. Exit interviews are just not, they're reactive, they're not proactive. I love stay interviews. But what also worked for me is I would have CARE champion groups. So if you hold an all-staff meeting, you have various different staff members that may be sharing concerns, but I would find maybe a group of 5 or 6, and I would use them as a pilot to hear everything that they talk about, everything they have concerns with, and I would address those. And then I would kind of send them back out to help disseminate their improvements or help give that referral once they saw something improve. So I would maybe take chunks of 5 or 6 staff members, try to alleviate their problems, and then keep going from there.
Yeah, it really is about closing the loop. I'm going to share that. So Ezzy, you're speaking my language. Exit interviews, we found that you really can't change or can control anything. It's all about being able to be proactive. And I call it more pulse surveying, pulse feedback. Is the stay interviews is very critical. And just closing the loop on the smallest things is so important to those team members. So that's great. Okay, well, we hear all the time about speed to lead in the sales process. Let's talk a little bit about speed to hire. I know we talked about trying to get to our recruits as fast as we can, but let's just dive in a little bit deeper on that. How pivotal and how quick are you today in that recruitment process? Let's just walk through that, what you all are specifically doing.
All right, Isaiah, you get the lead on this one.
Sure. So I think the biggest change we've seen over the last few years is there are more metrics to tracking the applicant where they are. And as the administrator, it really can't be something you're passive on. If your company is offering you metrics, you have to use it to help guide them. So for example, there would be metrics set up for when you get the application, how long is it taking you to have the first touch base? How long is it taking you to get to the offer? How long is it taking you to interview? As an administrator, as a leader, if you don't know those metrics, you're a little bit behind. But metrics are becoming the standard to evaluate and support your retention in HRT.
Well, I would echo that. Given the nursing shortage, and especially in some of our rural areas across the country, if you don't hire that person now, they're going somewhere else and they're going to get hired in 10 minutes. The problem you got to run into is you got to make sure you hire the right hire and not the right now hire. So your initial interview process is absolutely critical. How you identify how that person's going to fit in with your core values. You got to have a team that can identify that and pull it out within the first 15, 20 minutes of meeting the individual. And so having a standardized format so that someone walks in, perfect example, if someone comes in to fill out an application, the interview starts right then and there with your receptionist. Is that receptionist engaging them? Do they engage back? There's a famous, and I can't remember the company to save my life, but there's a famous high-powered company that they start the interview process in the morning. They introduce you to a maintenance person or a housekeeper. And then they take you to lunch and they interview you throughout the course of the day. And the very last question they ask you is, what was the name of the housekeeper? And if you can't answer that question, the interview's over and you're done. Because the housekeeper has to be as important as the CEO of the company. It's the same thing. Do they engage your receptionist? Because if they're not going to engage your receptionist or the person who's doing the intake of the application, why would you expect they're going to do that with families and residents? And so you got to be early on in identifying, are they the right fit? And then get them on board as quickly as possible. And that, we talked a little bit ahead of this conversation and Eze brought it up, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you start them on the floor the very next day, but a text message. Congratulations. How's it going? Is there anything I can do to help during this transition? A week out, hit them again. Hey, looking forward to your start. Just staying in that simple contact. It takes you 5 minutes and it keeps them engaged with you versus going somewhere else or trying to find somewhere they can make a little bit more money and then withdrawing their application with you.
And because the truth is they do have a wandering eye. They have a wandering eye while they're working for you, and they definitely have it while they're in the application period. So I said earlier that most people apply to 14 or 15 jobs. Say you give them that offer, that week in between, other people giving them offer, other people negotiating with them. So having no touch base and say, hey, how you doing? Or giving them a call is very important. And I love the fact that you mentioned the initial interview is probably the most important thing, because the person even doing the initial interview needs to embody the core values of the company. Because that's really what they need to be assessing them on. And when your team members get early feedback, it really should be against those core values. So I love the fact that that's front and center. And the assessor, the person interviewing, their skills have to be really good to assess quickly. So if they're not already the example, they're probably not the best to interview.
Yeah. And one thing I was going to add is one of my favorite stories and something for folks to think about is having a resident interview panel. There was a study that was done by a former dear friend and mentor of mine when she was at the operator, on the operator side of things, where they had their resident panel. And the last question that a resident asked was, how will you make me feel whole? And this is a skilled nursing center. And the people that answered that with empathy, so we know we need empathetic people, the people that answered that with heart, that cried, that's who they hired. And those people stayed past those 90 days. So I would highly encourage that if you can get the residents involved and who's going to be serving them, please do so.
Can I just throw out one more thing about the screening process?
Yeah.
Most people don't realize this. And if you've been in the field a long time, we all do it. If somebody has less than 2 years of work history on each one of their jobs, we would title it a job hopper and move on from the application. I just throw this out there because it's really important. The average millennial and Gen Z tenure at a place of work is 1.4 years. So if you're automatically ruling them out because they haven't made that 2-year mark, which is something we historically did, we could be passing on a good young professional. So just be aware that our bias to that specific thing rules out a lot of good, qualified, younger professionals.
Yeah, that is a really good point, Tom. It has evolved and changed, and you're exactly right. Thank you for sharing that. So let's talk a little bit about how sales and marketing fit into this. What are your thoughts on sales and marketing having metrics and quotas around recruitment and hiring? We have heard this kind of as a trend the last year to 2 years.
Go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, I really like it because as a facility leader, you're trained to look at things through the lens of quality assurance. And the more metrics you have, the more clarity you can give the vision to your team, the better you can set targets. But it allows you to assess things from a quality assurance standpoint and a root cause analysis. A lot more often than not, we have leaders that are maybe more subjective to how things are going. So it kind of takes the emotion out of it, and it allows you to know where you are and where you want to get to. Even if the numbers aren't pretty, it doesn't matter, but there has to be some type of reality orientation of where you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot I could add to that. I mean, Eze just pretty much laid it all out. So
Okay.
I'll sit on my hands on this one.
Yeah, great. So we kind of were talking about attracting talent. Let's kind of move over to the other side of retaining talent. So on the topic of retention, what strategies are you using and implementing today that you find that are working? And you can speak, from obviously Tom, from Illinois Healthcare Association perspective, from an administrator perspective, as a consultant and administrator. I'd love to hear perspectives on both sides.
So organizational health is probably the most important metric that you can measure. All right. And now that I'm going to put that above your quality indicators, your quality measures, all of that stuff. Because if you don't have a healthy organization, the rest of it doesn't matter. It's not going to happen. And so how you measure that at the facility level is really important. Asking the right questions, doing the right engagement surveys. What comes up a lot is the definition of presence. And what does that mean? How often are we having touch points with our floor staff? Retention, organizational health, those two things will tell you everything you need to know about the bottom line, quality, customer satisfaction, whether or not the hospitals are happy with you, and referrals. It all comes after that. So if you have an unhealthy organization and somebody walks in, they can feel it. They can sense it. They see the infighting and they see the lack of teamwork. Whereas if you have a really healthy organization and someone walks in, you hear that from a referral, whether it's a new staff member or a new resident, where they'll say, wow, this place just feels like home. It really makes a difference. So measuring that organizational health metrics is one of the most important keys, and you should be doing it more than just quarterly.
As leaders, we get very busy, especially if it's during survey time or you had a past survey, and it's very easy to get fatigued in the small things. It's very easy to do a pizza party for your first shift and forget about the rest of the shifts. It's imperative that the entire interdisciplinary team, the entire administrative team understands the why behind what this is important and their specific role in improving that. Because if it's just one person leading it, we already know it will fail. And if you're expecting the administrator to lead it, although they have a great heart, they typically do get tied down by compliance, company, and regulatory things as the year ebbs and flows. So it's important to have a secondary backup, a third backup, fourth backup. It really needs to be a team of 10 to 15 people that understand the why and that can say it with the same intentionality and conviction as the leader. It can't just be HR or the administrator that's championing that. Every other people in the building have to have that voice of a champion. Not saying, they can't say it passively. Come on down. Let's find out more about you. They have to say with that same authentic voice. And I think that's important. If the HR manager and administrator don't teach them that, they have to tell them why so the rest of the team members can understand their why.
Yeah.
As you said a key word. Go ahead, Steph. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Start with the key word. I'll chime in after.
Authentic. That was so, I probably the two things we just said on this topic, that's the most important piece. When leaders are engaging their teams, they have to be authentic. They have to actually, the team has to feel like they genuinely care. And there's this phrase out there that really bothers me. And every time I hear it, it's like a 4-letter word, and that's fake it till you make it. I hate that. You cannot fake whether or not you actually care about your people. It just doesn't work. So authentic is probably the key takeaway of this entire organizational health discussion.
And just to add to that, just with this post-COVID fatigue, they have felt like numbers. They have felt like robots. So if you weren't authentic before COVID, you need to double down on it now because people can see right through it very quickly. Family members, residents, and staff.
Yeah. Yeah, what I was going to mention is I know from past life that communication was the key driver to people's loyalty as a team member to skilled nursing communities and facilities, and also for residents. And we usually struggled, generally speaking, nationwide with both groups, our customers and our team members in that area. And we all know that we all can be better at communicating. So the thing that I say is, you know, closing the loop, whoever hears it owns it. Even if you can't make change or be able to like fix it right then, it's owning communication back to that person that they were heard. And what I find also fascinating is with one of the studies that KARE did last year is when team members talk or heroes talk about, am I being heard? We actually said, what does that mean? And one of the biggest things that it means is that they aren't basically getting burnt out, that we're not running short, that they're not having to do everything and anything and everything around the clock. So that's something to remember, because as we kind of go through, we'll talk a little bit about, you know, some of the dynamics of third party that's kind of taken place since COVID and after COVID. But it is something to remember that our people, when they say, am I being heard? Are you listening to me? It is, are you running short and burning me out? Okay.
And the pizza party doesn't work anymore, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you could still do that, but that became kind of the gold. Like, it used to be the gold standard. Then during COVID, it kind of became the norm. Like, everybody just threw pizza around like it was, because it's easy, right?
Yeah.
Now the expectation about what, you know, employee appreciation looks like has kind of, the bar's been raised a little bit, and you got to go beyond that. You know, you brought up kind of right around presence and understanding that, you know, the older staff member, and I'm going to talk about it in chronological for a moment. So the older generations, their touch points are farther apart. The younger generation, their touch points are daily, much shorter. So when you have an older leader in a younger workforce, there's an inherent gap in how they perceive what presence means to begin with. And so that kind of creates that, have I been heard? Well, you've got an older, you know, department head saying, well, I was out there last week checking in on them. And you've got a younger, you know, professional on the floor going, they haven't heard a thing I've said over a week. So there's some gaps there as well. So understanding, you know, going back to that generational thing, understanding your workforce and how your leaders will interact in that space makes a difference too.
And I'm not against pizza parties, but maybe you should ask your team if that is still effective, then you just always doing it. It's always about the people that you serve. Is that how they want to be served, rather than you assuming that's how they want to be served? That's all I wanted to add.
Great point.
Yeah, it is. It is a great point. So we've talked a lot about attracting and retaining talent. We know that we have to have tools that help us with that. So let's get a little bit into technology. From your perspective, how is tech and AI playing a role with recruitment and retention and engagement of staff?
Take it, Izzy.
Sure. I think we're going through part of the tech revolution in healthcare, and that was evident through COVID. So you have a lot of more money and focus towards that. But I think tech and AI, they're helping to take some of the manual processes away. We are a very manual process-driven industry, and they're looking to enhance that. So if that means tech and AI helps to maybe write part of a job description, great. If that means that helps them maybe craft part of that welcome letter, but you still need to add your personalized touch, great. A lot of even the platforms that are now being rolled out for staffing solutions, they're much more user-friendly than I was accustomed to. They look like a Facebook. They look like another platform. So I think that's the change that I'm seeing. You know, you can upload your picture and you can text them through the app. So I like the changes I'm seeing, but tech is coming in hot and heavy right now for sure.
Even in the payroll software now, people apply in the payroll software. It kicks back an immediate message. Hey, we got your, and you're moving people through the software as you make changes, kind of going back to what we were talking about before. They're getting an email notification that says, hey, your application has been read, you know, keeping them in that loop for the entire time that you're working through a decision on whether or not you're going to hire them. The software does that for you. So you can program it to have the ability to do that. And then, I mean, as A and I've been saying from the beginning, you got to track your metrics. How long is it taking? You know, all of that software stuff does it for you, so you don't have to go back to the days of an Excel spreadsheet and manual calculations, right? But just like your electronic medical record, we do not leverage the technology that's out there to the full extent of which it's able to do. I mean, most facilities don't use their EMR beyond 60% of what it's capable of doing. Well, it's the same thing with all of our recruitment software. Are we really unlocking all of the AI, unlocking all of the software ability, or are we just staying on the surface with what, you know, has been the easier side? And that's where you need to get these software companies to really come in and help explain what is the benefit if I go down this road, and how can I re-engage the people that are on the user end? And right now, like as I said, it's a very tech-driven world, and to keep up with that, you got to have vendor partners that are going to help keep you in the loop.
And if you're using a piece of technology and you're maybe using 60% of the site, like Tom mentioned, you should be going back to the developers and giving them that feedback, because most likely these tech developers are not coming from our field, they're coming from other fields where it's worked.
Yeah. So let's get into this. Isn't like a vendor show, but I would love to know if there's any specific software or technologies that you all have personally used that you've actually found super impactful, and, you know, give us some specifics around it, because I'm sure people are saying, hey, let us know what's working for you. Let's hear it.
We use Kronos for payroll, and we try to leverage that. Now, I'll just throw this out there. Kronos is not necessarily designed for 24-hour shift work with differentials. And, you know, gone are the days of everybody works an eight-hour shift-ish. Now you have 12s, 8s, 10s. So you really got to work with the developers. But we use Kronos to do applications and to move a lot of the employee paperwork process.
For us, I've mainly used Jazz HR for the applicant tracking, and I love it because I come from I want the website to be user-friendly. It's one of the most user-friendly websites for me. And if I know it's for me, I know other people that may not be as tech savvy will like it. I also like Pinnacle, which is, it's not so much for HR tracking, but they do employee engagement surveys. They do it like the first 15 days, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. You may be able to adjust it, but it just helps you get ahead of the first 90 days, because if a staff member has any issue in the first 90 days and you haven't addressed it, you kind of have lost them already. But I would say Jazz HR and Pinnacle are my two favorite tech platforms that I've been using.
That's awesome. So from an onboarding perspective, are there any technologies specifically that have been helpful that are newer that you've used?
Nothing. Once we get them in the door, everything we do is more internal. And we've kind of created our own system. So it's not like a software platform that we're using. It's just a very deliberate process that we follow.
Awesome. So let's kind of go on to the topic of third-party staffing. I know we've heard a lot and all about the third-party staffing being minimized. How has this really affected overtime and burnout and turnover from your all's perspectives as consultants and leaders?
Well, the third-party staffing piece is, it's kind of like the 800-pound gorilla, right? So coming out of COVID, we knew we lost 238,000 long-term care health workers. At least that's the number the American Healthcare Association is using. And we know that when that happened, the staffing agencies came in and they basically took all of your staff, offered them more money and more flexibility, and then sold them back to you at 2 times, 3 times the rate, right? We all know this happened. So what are we doing about that? I think there's been a shift in the industry where we used to compete with the pay rates of the people that are in your area and, oh, what's the facility up the street charging and what's this facility? You can't do that anymore. You're literally competing directly with the staffing agencies on pay rates to attract new staff. What does that look like? Well, for me, that was a 22% increase in my RN starting rates on December 1 of this year. 22%. And that's on top of what we did last year just to compete with the staffing agencies. I will go out there and I'll throw it out there. Third-party staffing agencies are killing long-term care. And so long as we're not getting reimbursed at these super high margins, if we can't figure out a way to control the amount of staff that we have from the staffing agencies at that high rate, we're all in trouble. And that doesn't even get into talking about quality, whether or not they're team players, whether or not they care as much about your residents as your staff. I mean, all of that notwithstanding, just the bottom line piece, it's a backbreaker for a lot of organizations that are on the margins.
Yeah, we're seeing increased costs of 2 to 3 times. Honestly, it's not sustainable. And I think the conversations have changed from it being more of an ultimatum where the staffing companies are saying you must use us, to companies being more strategic on who they partner with. So maybe partnering with the organizations that are a little bit more ethical, where they're doing things that are mutually beneficial, where they're not telling their staff to go into the facility and recruit all staff. And if they are doing that, you need to find out what staffing companies doing that and have those conversations. But I've seen the change with the third-party providers being more strategic to be a bridge and not a crutch.
Yeah. So have you found, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say the key is partnership. Like as they said, right? Is you the staffing company that is just providing you staff, or are they your partner in filling your shifts? And that conversation that you have with them is really important. Are we engaged together? You know, I'll throw a quick little CARE comment out there. They're engaged with it as a partner. Short-term solution, hire them on, bring them on your staff. It's not a, hey, let's go ahead and get on the agency merry-go-round, and you're always going to be stuck using one of our people. They're not a partner. A partner is someone that's going to help you fill that shift for the long term. So just thought I'd throw that out there since I knew you weren't going to do that, Stephanie.
Well, thank you, Tom. Well, and I think, I mean, you bring up a good point that third-party staffing is so general in term, and what people primarily think about it as is that traditional staffing agency, where there are folks that fall underneath that category on the other end of it, trying to really make sure that we attract and retain talent in our space. So I appreciate it, Tom. Have you found from your consulting work, either of you, anybody using what we would consider more partner type of third-party agencies for their recruitment funnels, strategies, tools?
It's kind of gaining a foothold, and I think staff are a little bit more apt to go with someone that is more of a partner type. I noticed that just from our perspective, we're filling a lot of our shifts that are agency shifts that are not from a traditional staffing agency, where they are more from a CARE, a clipboard, a company that they're not looking to get you stuck on them forever, but they're there to help you fill gaps and find partners or find candidates.
I would echo the same sentiments. I don't have anything else to add.
Awesome. Well, that is all the questions that I have. I don't know if there's any other final thoughts before we open it up to the Q&A of the group that's joined us.
Eze, you get to go first on final thoughts, sir.
Yeah, final thoughts are, old keys don't open up new doors. It is very important at this critical stage that leaders really take a self-assessment. As leaders, we're used to giving a lot of feedback and criticism, which is great. But as much as you give, you have to also be open to taking in. So more assessments, more touch base are needed, because the further you get into compliance and regulatory work and company work, you may get further away from your true purpose and mission in that facility.
Well said. And I'll just build on that. The one thing that you learn from the white paper is there's a disconnect between frontline and leadership, right? So we have to figure out how to bridge that gap between that frontline and leadership. And that really starts with understanding your workforce. You talked about exit interviews before, and you know, everybody likes to say, well, why'd you leave? Well, I can make more money somewhere else. The better question is, why'd you start looking? Because we all know you leave for more money, but you start looking because leadership is not engaged with the frontline staff. And so the key is just being able to make sure you bridge that gap.
Could I add one more additional point as well? There is a coalition that's doing a lot of great work called the Moving Forward Coalition. They have 9 action plans from a NASM report that was 600 pages that was released last year. Pretty much they spent this year writing out their action plan, and next year they're going to implement. But part of their national initiatives are to set a national CNA career ladder framework for the entire United States. So I just wanted to highlight the work that they're doing, because I think a year from now, after they're done piloting, we'll be able to talk about some successes.
Awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. All right, Amy, I'll turn over to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Steph. It's been a
Yeah.
great conversation so far. And yeah, and I've spoken with Alice Bonner and the folks at moving forward for various stories. They are really putting the work in. Okay, so we have some audience questions here to get to. Let's see. The first one is about scheduling. So how are residents responding to flex scheduling? Have you seen flex scheduling impact resident care? Maybe Tom, we can start with you.
All right. Flex scheduling is all the rage now, as we try to accommodate all the different, coming out of COVID, what we learned is the 8.5-hour shift or 8-hour shift, depending on how you work your payroll, is not the standard anymore. So the key is really not, you don't want your residents to even notice the bump in how the schedules are flexing out and whatnot. Although they do. I mean, they know our routines better than we know our routines. But it's having that nice blend of 12s, 10s, 8s, and then you got to have 4s in order to keep that continuity going. So you've got a little bit of creativity on that. I'll tell you, one of the most challenged positions in an organization is the one who does nursing scheduling.
Yeah.
And that's part of the onus is now falling back on the facility to be much more flexible. But this is a bit of a rigid industry. So how do we be flexible in this industry? And you're right, Tom, a lot of that does go to the scheduler. So you already know there needs to be more support, more development, because they're going to have to mess with the master schedule to make sure that there are slots for resident care. I don't think I've seen residents complain about flexible scheduling, but I would assume the more we are flexible, the higher staff satisfaction, and that will translate into resident care.
Absolutely. And yeah, I just want to remind everyone to submit any questions in the Q&A section in Zoom as we continue here. So Ezzy, this next one is for you, and along with Tom. How do you get the most out of your third-party solution?
I would say you can't use everybody. You need to have a preferred list of people that you want to do strategic business with. You need to have people that you can pull them behind the curtain and have some very transparent conversations, good, bad, or ugly, to be able to move forward. So if you say, I'm going to work with 3 main providers and I will assess you monthly based on the feedback from my scheduler and from the call-offs, and your slot on that list will go up and down. I think they share some accountability. And of course, the account managers want to keep that business. So they're going to have to put on more of the quality assurance cap and step into the ring a little bit more often. But I am seeing third-party providers being more willing to do that. But I think every provider is not going to be willing to do that. So finding the right ones that get it.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to that word partnership. You have to understand who you're contracting with. I agree with Eze. You don't want 15 providers. You want 3, maybe 4 or 5 partners that are in there that you sat down and we discussed, what are your values, what are our values, and do they align? Because if they don't align, why would they be willing to go that extra mile and be transparent with you? I think having difficult conversations is something most leaders shy away from. Most leaders are mediator style as far as their leadership style, and that means they like peace and they don't necessarily want to take those tough conversations head on. We need to have those conversations with our partners, and so that they understand what our needs are and we understand what theirs are. There's that thing called win-win. Everybody's got to win in a contract negotiation, right? That account manager's got to walk away feeling like they did enough to move their job. And when you got to walk away feeling like you didn't get, raked over the coals on this one. So having those conversations and being honest with your third party right off the front, like, hey, I know you got to win. I got to win too. So where's our middle median that we can both walk away feeling good about this? I think you can get a couple good providers that are in that same mindset. You're golden.
Yeah, no, I like what you mentioned, Tom, about partnerships. And I think it goes back to like relationship building as well. Just it's a two-way street there. All right. So another question here for you folks. During the employee onboarding process, what are ways to get more buy-in from new staff surrounding the company's benefits program?
Isaiah, you want to take the lead?
I think part of that would be the leader to understand the benefits program a little bit more in depth. That's the tough question, but I think it really revolves around the leader knowing the specifics, being able to say, here's an extra benefit that's typically underutilized that you could utilize, or here's a benefit that we rolled out last year. Not many people used it, but based on your specific story and why you're here, this may be beneficial to you. I think it's going to have to be more of an individualized approach to that, but I think it begins, especially from the white paper, with the leaders knowing the specifics on these benefits.
I agree 100%. Your leaders need to be very well versed at what the company can offer. But what we do wrong in this process is we always discuss benefits on the first day. And on that first day, we're also discussing, this is where you got to go to park, and this is where you got to go to punch in, and this is where, and the benefits piece becomes more white noise than anything. And it's not necessarily that your leaders are not communicating it effectively. It's just so much information to take in that something as complex as benefits gets lost in the noise. So introduce it on day one, because you're already talking about it at the time of hire, but wait a few days into that onboarding process before you really sit down and talk about the benefits and what it means for them. Ezay's right. Making sure you tailor that conversation to what their life needs are in that moment is going to make it more meaningful, and that take on of the information a lot more successful. But I think the key is moving it away from the day that you're trying to provide them with just the basics of survival in your building to a day that's a little bit more, they're settled in, their feet are on the ground. Okay, let's talk about now how we engage you for the rest of your career until you retire.
Mm-hmm. And then another question on benefits. How do we equip managers to be better versed in the company's benefits program? So Tom, maybe we can start with you there.
Put it in writing. Have a cheat sheet that they can follow and that flows down. Look, most people are very visual. If you give them a flow chart and they can follow it, so okay, this is what their life goals are. Here's what you want to talk about, and here's your key bullet points. Focus on this, 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 and this, and then let the conversation go where it may.
I really like flowchart because I'm a visual learner. I love flowcharts. I love the tree charts. Yes, if you say yes, take this path. If you say no, take this path. Make it as simple as possible. But I love you mentioning flowcharts.
Excellent. All right. Well, it looks like we are out of questions here. So I want to say thank you again to Tom, Ezay, and Steph for bringing this presentation to us today. The Staffing Summit does continue today at 1 p.m. Central, and we hope that you will tune in. Until then, have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Bye.
guys.